Hello and welcome to the World Affairs Council of Atlanta's briefing on the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel and the ongoing Israeli response. My name is Ricky Bevington, president of the council. The mission of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta is to provide a forum for informed discussion of global affairs that impact Atlanta's economy, culture, and quality of life. Today is Wednesday, October 11th, 2023. 5 days since Hamas militants entered into Israel and committed unspeakable acts of terrorism. As we speak, Israel is preparing a ground invasion of Gaza. This is a developing story, and we're here today to achieve some sort of understanding of the larger picture here. The scale and devastation of this violence is very difficult for many of us to process. So we want you to know that we are all feeling this and experiencing this with you. And the conversation we're going to be having today is really focused on, we're bringing in two political scientists based here in Atlanta to look at the big picture. How did we get here? And hopefully we can walk away with some idea of pathways to peace. If it doesn't feel too early to talk about that, it's certainly on my mind. How do we achieve peace and protect against further violence? Here with us today are experts. Dr. Rashid Naim is a principal senior lecturer in the political science department at Georgia State University. Dr. Naim was born and brought up in India. He has taught and held research positions at the Center for Islamic Studies at Oxford University in the UK and at the University of California, Santa Cruz and Union College in New York. Dr. Naim's areas of research and teaching are international relations, religion and politics, Middle East politics, international relations of the Middle East, South Asian politics, and nuclear proliferation. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Naim.
Sure. Yeah.
Dr. Lawrence Rubin is an associate professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at the Georgia Institute of Technology and co-director of the Georgia Tech in DC program and associate fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He served in the Office of Secretary of Defense for Policy as a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs fellow and has served on two congressionally mandated task forces. Rubin is the author and editor of 3 books, including The End of Strategic Stability, Nuclear Weapons, and the Challenge of Regional Rivalries. Also, Islam in the Balance, Ideational Threats in Arab Politics, and more. Thank you for being here, Dr. Rubin.
Thank you.
So let's, Dr. Rubin, I'd like for you to start by asking you to summarize the events that started in Israel just after sunrise on Saturday morning local time to the situation as it stands today, about 11 a.m. Eastern in Atlanta, 8 p.m. in Israel and Gaza.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me on in this webinar, this important and timely one, and for the crowd in attendance. So I'll be relatively brief. A lot of people have been following the news, but just again, to provide some of that context. On early Saturday morning, and some of the events I'll use will help inform both some of the challenges as we'll talk about and the opportunities that may exist for any type of peace. Early Saturday morning, and it's a Saturday morning, meaning the Jewish Sabbath at the end of the festival of Sukkot, people estimate about 3,000 Hamas and Palestinian Jihad operatives invaded or entered Israel in a coordinated attack on land, sea, and air, the same time launching about 3,000 rockets. And in the next 6 to 12 hours or so, massacred, and so we said the kid, as well as we're not 100% sure about how many yet, the numbers have been rising, and kidnapped military personnel as well as civilians, including women and children, while filming much of this activity and attacking places such as even a Raven, a desert, women and children in their homes, and so forth. And I want to emphasize this scope in part because it can and will play a role when it comes to the types of responses both that Israel has already started and may continue, as well as some of the factors will affect domestic political pressures on both sides from the Israeli and international perspectives. And Israel responded more recently bombing targets in Gaza, which has resulted in civilian casualties that maybe somewhere upward close to 500 to 800. I'm not sure the exact, close to 1,000. The Israeli casualties so far from the initial incursion, maybe somewhere upwards of 1,200, and there are many still injured in the waiting. Israel, in this way, as you noted, is mobilizing forces on the border for what seems to be a ground invasion, and also preparing some evacuations from what I had seen up north in anticipation of a potential second front being opened up by Hezbollah. And there's been some skirmishes as far as even this morning related to this. As you've seen, this is noted as one of, if not the greatest, or on par with an intelligence failure close to the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and also analogies have been made for the United States, Israel's 9/11, but I think in those terms we can debate about it. It may have been something greater than that. And again, I mention it for emphasis in the sense of when we come to context the discussion, the challenges and we hate to say opportunities that may exist of any type of stabilization. This comes in context with a moribund peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, the longstanding Israeli occupation and an ideological right-wing government, alongside an octogenarian Palestinian authority leader who rules through draconian measures, and a Gaza controlled by Hamas since 2006, which won elections through plurality, and in 2007 took over from Fatah and governing. And I added a lot of details, but that was kind of to give a broader context there, both from the micro and the macro. And I hope I didn't take anything from Dr. Naim. So I'm sorry.
No, I'll invite Dr. Naim to add anything he'd like to color in some details.
Well, I think Barry pretty much summed it up. There are just a couple of things. I have some of the latest figures coming out about casualties. So the Israelis are now saying that they're talking about somewhere in the 1,200 range, and the Palestinian Health Ministry is talking about somewhere in the 1,100 range of people killed. And of course, overwhelmingly on both sides, these are civilians who actually were not involved in any sense in the fighting, which is something which we really need to remember. And also, as was pointed out, I think you pretty much summed it up, the challenges in terms of the kind of leaderships on both sides. And later on, we will maybe get an opportunity to talk a little bit about the possibilities of maybe something positive coming out of this. So I just want to say something that I've spent most of my adult life following this conflict. This is a no-win conflict. There's going to be no winners on this side the way things are going. This is going to go on and on and on. It's close to between, depending on when you want to date this, 100 to 75-year-old conflict, which keeps repeating itself. The same cycle keeps repeating itself. Both parties do the same thing. And the expectation that something different is going to come out of it, as we know, is the definition of, I guess, stupidity. So we really need to kind of think beyond what has been going on. And hopefully in this discussion, we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about it.
You're right. Well, and that's why I brought both of you in to in a way, it's the same story and over again, but also at the same time, there are new players, there are new actors, there are new political forces and winds. What have we seen before, and what is unprecedented?
I think the unprecedented part is the scale of the Hamas attack, definitely. Right. I don't think I know there's been nothing on the scale before, both in the numbers of people involved in the attack and the number of civilian casualties on the Israeli side, right, which have never been. So that is unique, absolutely. And in a sense, Israel's reaction right now is very much the kind of what you normally expect as an initial reaction of anger and wanting to hit back, which is completely understandable. The question is, are we just going to repeat the cycle and then go back to passivity, or are we going to use this? I think there might be just a slight glimmer of hope that because the cards have been reshuffled in a sense, in a very unpleasant way, I think, that there might be an opportunity here to break the moribund so-called peace process. In my view, it is actually a dead peace process right now, and see if something can come out of it. The challenges, of course, are there, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about what kind of challenges they are and what, if anything, the international community can do. Because at the end of the day, this is a conflict which can only be solved by the Israelis and the Palestinians, not by anybody else. People from outside can come up with all kinds of ideas, but if there's no will on one or both sides to do this is going nowhere.
Dr. Rubin, I'll invite you to weigh in on what is also unprecedented is the civilian attacks. And how does that change the calculus here? We can't hear
You're muted, Barry.
you.
Yeah, some of
Can we
Barry's
unmute Dr. Rubin? Are you able to mute yourself? Unmute yourself? You're not? Okay. Can we ask our producer, Dan, to unmute Dr. Rubin, please? Oh, gosh. Let's see. Hang on. I'm so sorry. I don't have any control over this.
It's kind of strange, though.
I'm going to mute myself and call the producer. Excuse us, everyone.
It should be unmutable. Lawrence, are you sure you can't unmute it from your side? That's weird.
All right, I got it. I now for some reason something was lifted. So
Okay.
at least we know. Hopefully, it wasn't that intentional. But what I was going to add, and I think to provide again more understanding of the context or what we might see in a second, is the level and scale of the brutality in that attack, and it's something that we've talked about before. But I wanted to emphasize, I haven't seen it in certain responses that way in parts of the media, because what it does is it plays on the way it's being described in certain ways, trauma or pre-existing traumas from Jewish history in particular, of things evoking elements of Jewish history such as pogroms, and it's been characterized, for instance, at the festival, the music festival, that way, where you have the mass slaughter and allegations of rape and so forth, of things that evoke old history that way, and again can inform both the difference in understanding and the interpretation of tactics and strategy, or what might be revenge in that way, that are outside military bounds. And I'm not making a comment whatsoever, but when people will see that, those types of things, and those can also add to considerable extent also when another part of this is the hostage crisis or situation that is unprecedented in that sense. Israel had dealt with hostages when it comes to terrorists and that hijacking and so forth, but this is on a massive scale. And also the extent that, given the previous history of what has happened in this conflict, we saw Hamas holding hostages for dead Israelis, but even live ones, how many years and what type of price they were able to extract. The other part that's unprecedented, I think, also is that it's also international, in the sense that, before getting into this, of President Biden yesterday mentioned that there were, if he didn't say potentially, or American citizens that were also held hostage, which throws a totally different card there. So both of those, the qualitative aspect of the brutality adding to that additional trauma, and also that card of, in the equation of the hostage situation, is something that is very, very different in that sense. And complicates it even further.
Absolutely.
If I may just jump in here, I think those are important points. I think that is certainly what makes this stand out as compared to other stuff. But I think that it's also important to keep in mind, if we are going to talk about some kind of resolution, is that there is suffering going on the other side too, right? In no way justifies the behavior of these people in Hamas. Don't get me wrong here, but according in the 3 days since the Israeli retaliation began, the estimates are that about 200,000 people have been made homeless. Right? I know Israel is also evacuating people from along the border because of the ongoing conflict, but those people actually can be evacuated somewhere. People from Gaza have nowhere to go. Gaza is under blockade. And so even if you want to just get away from the craziness, you really don't have an option. And talking about foreign people being involved, I actually, just before we came on the air about half an hour ago, heard from a Palestinian American who lost 6 members of her family last night in an Israeli airstrike. And I think, at least I haven't confirmed this, but at least some of them were probably also American citizens. So this is it's so important for us because our sympathies often tend to be only on one side, and that's a part of the problem, that this is a humanitarian disaster and should be treated as such, no matter who the victims are. Because as always, in these kind of situations, the vast majority of victims are innocent civilians, whether they were in Israel or they're in Gaza or they're anywhere else. So.
And President Biden said Hamas does not have the interest of the Palestinian people in mind. He was clear to make that distinction between Hamas and the people who are living in the Gaza Strip and West Bank. And so I think we should bring in the role of regional actors here, because there are a lot of regional actors who have different stakes. In fact, I heard an interview this morning with a leader of Hamas who lives in Qatar, a very, very disturbing interview, and I would be happy to share it after this to our attendees. That's through The Economist on their podcast app. It's really just floored me, actually. But frankly, this entire thing is, I think, is just so shocking to all of us. So let's bring that in. Who are the regional actors? How do they create challenges, but also opportunities in the future? Dr. Rubin.
Oh, okay. Well, and I'll name a few. I could go through a lot of them, but I'll probably start off with the biggest challenge in that way, which is Iran, and the United States has been hesitant to, to backtrack a little. Hamas as an organization, which started in the late 1980s, actually during the Intifada, as both an organization resisting Israel, fighting against Israel's occupation, but also as a counterweight later, and it emerged this way, especially as a spoiler, an alternative to the secular Palestinian Authority, and wants to create an Islamic state where Israel exists and destroy Israel and both the Jews. And I mentioned that in the sense of it goes beyond just being anti-Israel. It's more so, and you kind of saw that in some of the violence there. The reason I mention this is initially they didn't necessarily get support from Iran through the 1990s. It changes a bit. And now Iran is seen as a backer, both financially and potentially is being talked about both in terms of training and coordination, and a lot of these meetings and the training that people knew about before or had claimed play a role. So there's a question, the same thing to do with Hezbollah and the agency that Iran has, or it has, in its relationship of supporting Hezbollah, the Lebanese actor in northern Israel, which will north of Israel, that will play a role in southern Lebanon. Iran playing this huge role there, and what it may or may not do. And you can think of it in terms of if Hezbollah and the types of Hamas and the types of risk it wants to take, knowing that there would be this massive incursion and response, would it have done this type of act without having some type of potential guarantee with Iran? Now, thinking about this in terms of helping explain the timing, there's a lot of, it's not me to have forwarded this idea that maybe this was a way to derail some type of normalization process that would further exclude and alienate the what's called axis of resistance with Iran, Hamas and Hezbollah and potentially other actors there. And this is a way to derail it by causing conflict. We can talk about how it could go in either direction in a certain sense, but this is kind of to break things up. I could go into a number of different actors where they play a role, but I will give my colleague a chance also to talk, so I don't monopolize the time.
No, you mentioned at least one of the major actors here, and the implications of that relationship and where it could go in terms of where this conflict, if it escalates, goes. But very frankly, I have a much more harsh view of the entire international system. I think it's quite sad to see countries lining up on both sides, right, as cheerleaders for people who are engaging in mayhem, instead of talking about restraining the behavior of all sides, right? And this is where I see the opportunity to maybe move this conflict in a different direction or move it towards some kind of a solution being lost. That I think that by cheerleaders, you know what I mean. There are people there who are saying, yeah, go on, do it. And we are basically, each side is claiming that saying they're giving their people, as they call them, carte blanche to do whatever they want to do and all that kind of stuff. That's completely unhelpful and not in the long-term interest of anybody, right? Whether it's the Iranians or the European Union or the Americans or whoever is taking whatever side here. And I think that is probably the most disturbing aspect of what is going on. The fact that these two groups of people are fighting with each other and, you know, killing each other and committing atrocities against each other, unfortunately, is almost like par of the course. But to have the international community not pushing to move this out of this vicious cycle that we have found ourselves in for, as I said, at least for 75 years, if not longer, is, I think, the saddest part of how the international community has reacted to this. I understand completely the horror and anger, justified anger, at what has happened and what is happening, even as we speak. But that, I think, is emotionalism and not dealing with this issue in a more mature manner. So I know I'm being very critical of a lot of countries here.
But, you know, Hamas is, how do you negotiate with an organization whose stated goal is not peace? Okay. They don't. Hamas has stated the destruction of Israel and the Israeli people is their goal. I don't know what the international community can do if those are the only cards that Hamas is willing to play.
But there is more to it than that, by the way, right? I mean, you're absolutely right. Hamas's position is that they want to replace Israel with whatever kind of state they are thinking about, right? But the reality is that Israel does not recognize a Palestinian state either, right? That is what the whole two-state solution is supposed to resolve. I think that if a solution is arrived which marginalizes the extremist by virtue of the fact that most people on both sides, by the way, as Dr. Rubin mentioned, Israel has a very right-wing government with messianic ideas about a greater Israel and all that kind of stuff. These people, in my view, on both sides, really represent extreme views within the communities, and they exploit the fact that this conflict goes on. Right. That if and I draw attention to a success story, which I think is maybe a model to look at of what happened in Northern Ireland eventually, right? That a group of people who were extremists, the Irish Republican Army, and on the other side, the British government, eventually through U.S. mediation as a neutral mediator, right, managed to bring that conflict to a conclusion, really. I mean, yeah, sure, there's a group which calls itself the real IRA now, but they are marginal, right? They don't have support because for most people on both sides of this conflict, they want to live a normal life. They don't want to live the kind of life that they are being forced to live by decisions of extreme wings of their own communities. And I think that is the key element here. One more point I want to make here, maybe this was just a propaganda thing, but after Hamas won the elections in Gaza, they came up with a proposal. In fact, it was printed as an op-ed piece in the New York Times, where they argued that there should be a 40-year freeze on bringing on attacks on each other and trying to bring about changes on the ground. So in their words, and it might have been just propaganda, I don't know. In their words, that a generation which is born and grows up without all this history of bloodshed and memories of horrible things that were done to them is old enough to sit down and reach some kind of a solution here. Right. So it's not a one-sided, completely one-sided thing here.
Sure.
We were talking about Israeli hostages. Hostage taking is a horrible thing, shouldn't happen, right? But at the same time, there are people in Israel who are under what the Israelis call administrative detention, that is being detained without charge in many cases.
Sure. I want to give Dr. Rubin an opportunity, because I think that the challenge for conversations like this is this, but the whataboutism. I don't want to, that's a pretty loaded term, but this sort of, but this. And
exactly.
I think we can agree.
I agree. We shouldn't go there. I agree with you.
The civilians, people are struggling on all sides. So let's just take a step back and let Dr. Rubin respond to my initial question, which was, how can regional actors in the international community participate in slowing things down, calming things down, when Hamas has said that is not what they want?
Oh, okay. So, and I'm going to go there by way of a different approach of some of the things that have been immediately learned, which provide more challenges than opportunities. In this way, one of the big issues has been in seeing Hamas as a spoiler, so to speak. This was a period of time in which the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, which isn't a member of, was moving toward in that direction, and Hamas derailed that, and by these massive waves of suicide bombings, brought aspects of the Palestinian Authority in on it, and they're competing for a certain populace that way in the 1990s when you did have a peace process. So the idea or thinking had been for a lot of times, and this goes with Islamist groups in academic thinking, which I think has been largely disproven, of saying we're going to bring them into governance of some sort, and therefore they're going to moderate that way. And this is what's going to happen. They're going to get rid of these extreme beliefs because they're going to have to govern in some way, and they're going to sometime. And we've seen that to be the case of many people in Egypt had argued this for a while, or outside of Egypt, the government is saying something else, you bring them in, they'll do this. And you see the results after the Arab Spring of when you had a Muslim Brotherhood government doing the same thing. The context is such that this was also provided or kind of supported by external actors, and this is where it brings it in. Turkey and Qatar have been big supporters regionally when it comes to Islamists, but also having relationships. Turkey's kind of changed over periods of time with Israel. But Qatar having this relationships with Iran, Israel, and some of these Islamist groups. And in a certain sense, they were providing this type of foundation for some element of stability for the way Israel was looking at it. And Israel in the past had been looking at it whereby they don't want a Palestinian Authority to collapse, but they also don't want it that strong. And where Hamas, they obviously want to keep some within rules of the game, where you have these skirmishes that go on, but at the same time, not complete collapse in that way either. And so these external actors have almost been helping tell a narrative, I don't think intentionally, of saying, here, let's go business as usual. And then that's what helps us understand of this element of taken surprise that way, and the role that they can play. In that way, it may have been a detrimental role. I'm not 100% sure. But the only thing that we have, I think one of the opportunities we have, and I'll say just as far as stability might go, is it will be something like Qatar or potentially Turkey, which both of them have to balance their relationships and their interests as being regional actors, and also the relationship with various factions, Palestinian factions, and also with Israel. And Turkey is an interesting case too, because in the last number of years, it's tried to warm its relationship had very strict tense one with Israel, but had been moving more along those lines. Those are two regional actors that play a role. Egypt will, of course, Egypt is, a lot of people forget this, but after the the coup that the Hamas enacted against against Fatah in Gaza, which was another thing that kind of says, okay, where is this? This is an extremist organization that wants to take and seize power, and did so in 2007 violently. Egypt cooperated or collaborated with the siege of Gaza as well to block off, because they have an important interest of not allowing this flow of refugees and destabilizing the population. And they're certainly no fan of Islamists, but their population is vastly supportive of the Palestinian cause. And so they will play an important role in probably, I think, some element of stability at the border or an overflow. And I think it's way too early to be seeing, because we haven't probably seen as much violence as we will see soon in the future. But with negotiations, potentially Qatar, when it comes to hostage crisis, because they've been doing this stuff, I don't know how much we're going to get, given we have over 100 there. And I keep mentioning this because that will be an issue. And the other regional players they haven't gotten into so much, but might be the role of the United States clearly playing a big role, and Russia and China I see as mostly but rhetorical. So, and they're more global powers. So as far as those opportunities, I see the regional ones, potentially stabilization, but I don't see anything necessarily in the future that will in the near future that will help provide those opportunities for anything but some type of calm in the interim.
Well, calm would obviously be what we would like to see earlier rather than later. I'd like to look at the role of the United States. Obviously, President Biden has come out forcefully saying how strongly the United States will stand with Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself. Does the United States bear some responsibility? Obviously, there's finger pointing on all sides. Domestic divisions within Israel have been, the claims are just distracted the Netanyahu government, that the morale within the military was low because of what were perceived erosions to democratic norms, and soldiers didn't feel like they could fight for a country that wasn't a real democracy. And what were they fighting for? So what is the role of the United States in terms of not knowing that this was going to be happening? What is the role of the United States here?
Want me to answer that? The United States, we have had a long history of close relations with Israel, right? But there are limits to what the United States can do. Israel is an independent, sovereign country. I think the Biden administration has made it very clear that it is not happy with the direction which Israel's domestic politics are going. There's also the resentment which would come if the Americans really put too much pressure on any side in this, just like any of the other players do. These players are also autonomous actors in this conflict. All outside powers can do is to, push them along towards coming to some kind of a solution. I think that the domestic crisis that Israel has been facing now for quite a while is a big part of this dilemma that we face, especially because of I was listening to a interview with the former Israeli Prime Minister on my way in to work this morning over the BBC, who was basically saying, he was obviously from a former Labour Prime Minister, and he was saying there are people in Israel's government who should never have been in the Israeli government because they're messianic extremists who have no understanding of how this conflict can be resolved except by force and by expulsion and stuff like that. So the United States is in a tough position in a way that how do you deal with a ally whose government is represents people who are not the kind of people that the United States would like to do business with in that situation, but are still nevertheless the government of this ally. Right? You cannot just say, "Oh, we're not going to talk to you, or we won't do anything about it." So that I think is one. And since I'm talking about this gentleman in the interview, it was very interesting. He was, of course, saying that the Israelis should use whatever force they want and things like that. But he was saying, and just because this causes inconvenience, as he put it, to the Palestinian population, should be no reason why we should restrain ourselves, right? And his use of the term inconvenience to refer to all the suffering happening on the Palestinian side I think, reflects a deeper malaise in how these two parties look at each other and how Hamas looks at the Israelis. Yeah, it's the same attitude, right? Oh, it's an inconvenience. We are doing this because they do this to us. So whatever justification they come up with, all bogus in my view.
Dr. Rubin, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna, yeah, you want me to, I was gonna answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
one
was
thing
gonna tack on.
Oh, go
I was
ahead.
going to tack on to the same question. Have you respond to the question about the role of the United States, but also if another mediator were to step forward, who might that be? So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll go back and just kind of say this kind of goes back to the question if the United States, its role and responsibility. And I think one issue is seeing it as the United States as being, and the world does this, as being somehow responsible for what does and doesn't happen. And this, in my opinion, had nothing to do with the United States in the sense that it would have happened. And I also do think that this could have happened under a left-wing government as well as a right-wing too. If you're looking at it, the types of aims that do or don't change. The crisis that occurred may have been something that had occurred because there was this crisis an institutional crisis within Israel, a prime minister who is on trial and so forth, and all the intricacies of politics. But this could have occurred in any one of those governments. So going back to the question, in terms of the United States and its role and responsibility and what it has, I think you heard from President Biden, there was a sort of a soft nudge of full support for Israel, but also a quiet way of saying we also hope that you will abide by the laws of war, understanding that that there are certain, we'll say, inconveniences that way. And any country, both the United States and Israel, would also know that the questions that come against is how and consistent are you with those versus putting your own citizens at risk in these military operations to achieve a strategic objective. The role the United States can and does play is one, de-escalatory. If you say in terms of moving an aircraft carrier toward the region, which is a single signal both to Israel as reassuring its allies, others around the world, and also to Iran saying stay away, do not escalate, that's a potential way to stabilize a conflict. Having a 2 to potentially 3 or 4 front war, I mean, even though we'll say a Lebanon war, something coming in from Syria, who knows what other types of things, would be even a grander conflagration for the region and would take that much more. That might be one role of stability in the meantime that it can provide there and that no other country can provide. The Israelis aren't going to also negotiate or listen to in that way the Europeans as being the negotiation. Maybe the Germans have been very successful in quiet negotiations when it comes to hostages and so forth. But as the European Union, it's not going to work that way. It only has some economic power that way, but nothing in the terms of the size and the scale and scope and that the United States, its closest ally, has. So that it is the United States, as far as calming this, is the only game in town. But when it comes to what is negotiated, that might have to be with the partners alongside with some other actors, both regional and potentially with the United States backing.
We have some great questions that I've actually tried to incorporate into my own questions here, and we have just a couple of minutes left with our esteemed experts. Thanks to both of you for your time. We've really covered a lot of ground here. I'd like to turn to solutions and to the hope, and like to just hear your perspectives on what may come of this that we could possibly call positive, in terms of positive being an enduring, real, lasting peace for all people in this region. Dr. Naim, you've argued that the 1973 Arab-Israeli War was serious enough, it shook both leaders of both sides enough to have them get serious about finding a solution. Is this war bad enough that could happen again? What might that look like?
The main thing which came out of the 73 war was that the doctrine that the Israeli government had, that having these buffer zones around it would give it the ability to protect Israel in case of a war, the Sinai in particular. And the events of the war showed that that didn't work. At the same time, the Egyptians and the war, as you know, ended in, depending on who you talk to, stalemate or Israeli victory, whatever. Everybody claims they won the war. But the bottom line is that forced not only on the Egyptian side, where there was an understanding that, okay, this is the limit of what we can do militarily, but also an understanding on the Israeli side that the buffer zone idea and military solution to Israel's perceived threats that the Israeli elites had from the neighbors was, that policy did not work. And therefore, the United States had an opening, which I think they stepped into, and negotiated an agreement which satisfied both parties enough for them to reach an agreement. And the peace treaty with Egypt, even though it has ups and downs, has held, right? The Egyptians haven't gone back to going to war with Israel and vice versa. So in that sense, what happened in 73 was very significant, that it forced both sides to rethink their long-term strategy. And I think depending on how this plays out, this ongoing conflict right now, we might be seeing another opportunity, because the real shock in Israel, besides the scale of what happened, was the fact that it could have happened. Right? That this was happening on Israeli territory. This was not happening in the West Bank. This was not happening in Gaza. This was happening in Israeli territory, in Israeli towns. And there is going to be, I'm sure, because Israel continues to function as a accountable society, there's going to be a lot of questioning about, well, how was it that this was allowed to happen? Why was there intelligence failure? The usual the review that happens after what are perceived to be major security threats and failures of this intelligence establishment, whatever you want to call it. But what that does is that maybe there are people in Israel who, and on the Palestinian side, because I think Hamas can be a troublemaker in that sense. But if a deal is made which satisfies the aspirations of most Palestinians, most being critical element here, then there is an opportunity to move this forward. And there are essentially two ideas out there, right? One which everybody talks about, the two-state solution idea, which in my view, unless the Israelis are willing to uproot a whole bunch of settlements, is a dead idea at this point. And these settlements, which are considered to be illegal by everybody, including us, have been put in place by both right and left-wing governments in Israel, and going back to 1967. And we now have a situation where a viable Palestinian state on the West Bank is actually not possible. Right? So that solution, though people still talk about it, as you know, Lavrov yesterday said the way out of this conflict is a two-state solution. So people are still talking about it, but I think in practical terms, given the domestic politics of Israel, given the domestic realities of the Palestinians, a two-state solution, I wish we had been able to do this, but it is dead. Right? Unless something really dramatic happens, which I don't see happening. And the other solution is something which there were people in Israel talking about very early on, which is referred to as the one-state solution. Right? Let Israel annex the West Bank formally, make it part of Israel, right? Instead of just occupying it for these 58 odd years that it has been doing it. Right? And everybody gets citizenship. They're all Israeli citizens at that point with equal rights. That is not acceptable to the extreme right wing in Israel, right? Because that is not their view of what Israel should be, right? Even though there were early people involved in the Zionist movement, even as late as 1948, who were talking about a one-state solution. Right? Sure. And from the point of view of right and wrong, that seems to be a solution which morally and otherwise makes sense and is feasible, though it is going to be resisted by both sides, by the way. There are both sides who prefer to live in their own ghettos, but yeah.
I'm going to allow Dr. Rubin to have the last word here, and you're free to respond to what Dr. Naim has said, or answer a more broad question about path forward.
I'm not sure that there really is at this stage in my mind a path forward. I think it may be if we're looking for solutions, maybe in the wrong places, the challenge with this historical analogy of 1973, which is a hopeful one in a certain sense of seeing silver lining, is that I think it underestimates, again, the trauma or relived trauma of people ready or willing to make some type of concession that way, especially the difference being Egypt, as we know from records later on, was not necessarily bent on the absolute destruction. It was a limited war this way. Hamas in that way, as far as we've known, and I think this adds into this, is that a lot of people will be in this reckoning saying, we misunderstood. Some of us misunderstood what Hamas really is and wanted, and this showed their true colors rather than a limited war. I don't think, engage in a limited war with that type of brutality against civilians and expect it that way. So in that sense, those are some of the obstacles for finding those types of pathways to peace, as much as I would love to say that Dr. Naim is 100% correct and wish I weren't in that way. I think those are some of seeing those types of differences are that way. And yes, there will be internal reckoning as well once this is, but again, the hostage part adds to that trauma. In addition to this, if there is a potential way of some type of stability, you can see both for the reasons not necessarily bringing through a Saudi Israeli deal or normalization process by any means as a result, but it may continue along these paths without anything formal by showing here's what Iran can do in the region, and just to remind when you have these deconfliction type of processes which occurred over the summer between Iran and Saudi Arabia, these are some of the limitations there. So maybe it's that they won't play in their environs, but they'll play outside and can destabilize it. That may bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together. That may be a different type of way around it, because the Palestinian political process is not going to be one where it's amenable to any type of solution anytime soon. If you remove Hamas in that way and replace leadership in Gaza, you will not be able to necessarily find a legitimacy. Not necessarily that Hamas is legitimate either. And so in doing so, I wish I had a more positive message at this stage. I unfortunately don't. I think a lot of people might say the death and destruction might bring people together. I think that's an argument, and there's a logic to it. I accept that, but I hope I'm wrong in the sense of I'm a pessimist right now, at least in the interim, when it comes to this. I think the best we can hope for is just some type of a pause, as long as strategic objectives that a side feels that has been achieved when it comes to diminishing Hamas's capability and also making sure a two-front war does not occur. And the United States will have to deal with some of these other regional issues in the future.
Well,
right?
Well, we'll have to bring you both back on as this unfolds. Certainly, the World Affairs Council of Atlanta will be engaged in helping our members and audience understand what's happening as we learn what is happening. Thank you both so much, Dr. Lawrence Rubin of Georgia Tech and Dr. Rashid Naim of Georgia State University. Thanks to our audience. We will be posting this on our YouTube, which you can access from our website, which is wacatlanta.org. And also, while you're there, go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter so you can find out about upcoming events on this topic and all types of programming that we offer you at the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. And until next time, thanks all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.